You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Now, you believe that Syracuse football will get at least 7 high school recruits from the state of Florida, a state that's, we know the big three in the state, right? Florida, Florida State, Miami, even to a lesser extent, you got UCF and USF that'll steal a recruit here or there. So before we even get into some of these players that Syracuse is going after, how is it that Syracuse has become more prevalent in the state nowadays?
Connections, relationships. Fran Brown has recruited the state of Florida before, and some of his assistants have ties to Florida as well, and they've prioritized it. And quite frankly, they've built relationships the old-fashioned way with just communicating with kids, and they love it. When I was talking with Calvin Russell on Sunday, it was pretty simple. Somebody said, hey, what's the deal with Syracuse? We keep hearing the buzz with him. He goes, I'll give you a simple answer. And he goes, Fran Brown. And that was the end of the answer. So when it starts with your head coach being an elite recruiter, you've got a chance with just about anybody. But Syracuse overall, that staff does a great job in the Sunshine State, and they deserve credit.
I guess along those lines, Brian, what are some of the common themes that you notice when you're talking to these Florida recruits, when they're talking about Syracuse specifically, I guess also compared to other schools?
I get comments like they're real. They really want to get to know you. That's family. Those kind of comments usually transcend into at least being in the final group. And I can't remember a time when that wasn't the case. I don't care if it's basketball recruiting, football recruiting, whatever. You hear words like family. I mean, that's kind of self-explanatory. These are guys that have figured out how to get kids to communicate with them consistently. They're doing a good job with family members, etc. It's not just a player. This is an all-around recruiting operation that's hitting on a pretty high level right now. So I know it's unusual for me because I don't think of Syracuse recruiting as an elite program, but they're recruiting that way, at least in the Sunshine State.
Well, Brian, let's now get to some players that Syracuse football is going after. Now, we know the big fish in the class of 2026. We're going to talk about Calvin Russell, ladies and gentlemen, in just a moment. But before we even get to the class of 2026, we got to talk about one guy that's left in the class of 2025, and he might just be the best player overall in the country that's still actually available. And that's Javeion Flowers. He's a 2025 defensive back. The reason why he's available is very simple. He reclassified pretty recently to this class, top 100 overall recruit in the country on 24/7 Sports, and he's down to 6 schools, and those 6 schools being Syracuse, North Carolina, Miami, Florida, Georgia, and Auburn. So it's definitely going to be a tough recruitment there. He is officially scheduled to visit Syracuse, Brian, in case you weren't aware. It's going to take place on March 21st. So, Brian, have you spoken to Javeion Flowers?
Not recently. I mean, I've met him in passing and interviewed him when he was at the Under Armour game back in January. This is before he changed classes, though. So we weren't prodding him then for this kind of information. And then it happened after. We're like, oh, because he had a great camp. And maybe that's why he decided, because he played very, very well. But I haven't spoken to him recently, and everything's been kind of quiet on what's really going on. It's been interesting.
How do you think Syracuse stacks up in the race for Flowers compared to those other schools?
Well, based on what I've learned over the last month, I give them a shot with any Florida kid that they prioritize for any length of time, and Flowers was one of them. It's a Miami Northwestern kid. He's teammates with Calvin Russell. They've got a good relationship in the greater Miami public school program and South Florida in general. If they have a good visit, they got a shot. And he wants to go play somewhere and have a chance. So this is really interesting. A lot of people are just going to say, oh, he'll go to Miami. Well, everybody thinks that about all the kids. And over half the kids in Florida leave the state. That's fact. So there's a chance for Syracuse to land him, and do not be surprised if they do.
Even though it's been a while since you've spoken to him, Brian, from what he's told you, what's he looking for in a program? Is it relationships, family? What is it?
Relationships. And I think that's one of the reasons Syracuse has got a chance. They've proven that, and it's steadfast. They know how to recruit. They adjust to each player, and they find a way to gain momentum through conversations. It's the old-fashioned way of doing business, really. and I respect it. So if he has a good visit when he goes up in March, anything is possible, anything at all.
I guess I also meant to say NIL, because NIL is also that elephant in the room where the dollars also got to match. So how much do you think is NIL playing a factor into this?
Oof, that's a great question. Every kid, it's different. And sometimes it changes based on relationships too. There are certain kids that will give up hundreds of thousands of dollars because the relationship at another school and or what they project as the development at that school is just better. So just thinking, oh, well, the kid took the highest number. That's not always the case. I know of a few kids that turned down literally 7 figures because they wanted to go to a different school, and it's worked out. It's not like they didn't get anything, but they weren't going to get as much up front. Flowers pretty confident in himself, so I don't think it's necessarily high dollar wins. He will evaluate both and combine the two aspects of coaching and the NIL, put them together.
Gotcha. And finally, what do you think his timetable is here?
That is wild because I've heard different things on this. Is it like April 1st? What? I've heard different things, and the NCAA changes the rules so much. I hope it's by the end of this month, just so it's off the table for me, for one. But if it doesn't, I think he can just enroll in the summer. I know the NCAA wants to have all the boxes checked and all that, but I believe it'll be done this month, but he has to enroll this summer somewhere.
It's funny that you mentioned that because you're right. It seems like there's these deadlines, but at the end of the day, he just decides to reclassify to 2025. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute. I thought I already signing day already passed. Both signing days, I might add. Yeah. The early signing day, the regular signing day, which really isn't the same anymore with the early signing day. And he's just still out there. So it's, what is the point of the signing days if you could just, I guess, sign whenever? And oh, by the way, wasn't there a high school recruit that entered the transfer portal in 2024? I know it has nothing to do with Syracuse, but didn't that happen as well?
There's been several kids. Julian Sayin signed with Alabama, and then 2 weeks later, he was transferring to Ohio State because Nick Saban decided to retire. So, yeah, signing is not as important as it used to be, and I think they want to have, especially for the coaches' sake, the signing day is more for the coaches than it is the players. They need to have breaks from this stuff. So I'm all for it. And it's for us too. We need to have timetables so we can plan our days, just, our normal lives. But Javari is a very special case because he reclassed so late. I'm not sure if I've seen one go that route. And I hope there aren't a lot more, to be honest with you. But again, let's hope that he's done by the end of March.